Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dive into one of Christianity's most foundational, and let's be honest, one of its most mind-bending ideas, the Trinity. So let's just jump right into the heart of the puzzle, shall we? How can one God exist as three distinct, co-equal persons? I mean, this isn't just some ancient riddle, it's a question that has shaped 2,000 years of theology. And this right here is the classic way it's laid out. It's often shown as the shield of the Trinity. The logic, it feels like a paradox, doesn't it? It kind of makes your brain hurt. The Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, but the Father is not the Son. That is the central tension we are going to unpack today. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the puzzle itself, then we'll trace its roots back through the scriptures. We're going to see how this whole doctrine was basically forged in the fire of some really intense debates, and then we'll wrap up by looking at its lasting legacy. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the theological puzzle. Before we can really get into the arguments, we've got to have a super clear definition of what we're even talking about. So the official doctrine says that one God exists in three co-eternal, consubstantial persons. Okay, big words, let's break them down. Co-eternal just means they've all existed forever, together. No one came first. Consubstantial means they all share the exact same divine substance or essence. So the key distinction here is between what God is, that's one divine being, and who God is, three distinct persons. Which brings us to Section 2. Now, here's a fun fact. The word Trinity never actually appears in the Bible. Not once. So where on earth did this whole idea come from? Well, early Christians believed they found some pretty powerful hints scattered all throughout the texts. And what's really interesting is that some of the earliest questions start right here, in the very first book, Genesis. When God says, "Let us make man in our image," that use of the plural immediately makes you wonder, who is us? And this one little word led to two main interpretations. One view, which is pretty common among scholars, is that God is talking to his heavenly court of angels. But another interpretation, one that early Christian thinkers really ran with, saw this as a very early, maybe even veiled, hint of a plurality within God himself. And this idea wasn't just a one-off thing in Genesis. All through the Old Testament, you find these descriptions of a coming Messiah figure with titles that, well, they kind of blur the line between human and divine. Isaiah calls this figure Mighty God, and Daniel sees a Son of Man who is given everlasting dominion. That's language usually saved for God alone. Now, when we jump over to the New Testament, these hints, they get a whole lot more direct. Theologians talk about something they call triadic formulas, which is just a fancy way of saying places where the Father, Son, and Spirit all show up together in one cohesive phrase. Take Matthew, for instance. Jesus commands his followers to baptize in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Notice that, a single name for three persons. Or look at Paul's blessing in 2 Corinthians, linking their actions together. And of course, there's John's epic opening. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. That verse alone laid a massive foundation for understanding Christ's divinity. Okay, so this brings us to Section 3. You've got all these scriptural seeds planted, right? Well, the early church then entered this period of super intense, sometimes really fiery debate to try and figure out what it all actually meant. It wasn't until around the year 2000 that a church father named Tertullian actually coined the Latin word Trinitas, which, you guessed it, means Trinity. He was the one who finally gave this developing concept a name and really started to formally defend it. But his defense was so important because the church was wrestling with some majorly different ideas. Some people argued that Jesus was just a man adopted by God. Others said the Father, Son, and Spirit were just different masks that God wears. But the biggest challenge, the one that really forced the issue, was Arianism. This was the teaching that the Son was a created being and therefore not co-eternal with the Father. So that brings us to Section 4, the councils decide. To settle these huge disputes, especially this Arian controversy which was tearing churches apart, leaders from all over the Roman Empire gathered for a series of historic meetings. And you can see the key moments on this timeline. After Tertullian gives the idea its name, that Arian crisis blows up, leading to the massive First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Then, a few decades later, another council in Constantinople expands the definition, this time really zeroing in on the role of the Holy Spirit. Now, the single most critical outcome of that first council at Nicaea came down to one Greek word, homoousios. It means of one substance or of the same being. By declaring that the Son was homoousios with the Father, the Council delivered a decisive blow to Arianism. They were making it crystal clear. Jesus was not some lesser created being. He was and is fully and eternally God. Okay, so the doctrine is now officially defined. The next massive challenge was, how do you explain it? I mean, how do you help people wrap their heads around such a profound mystery? This gets us to Section 5, Theological Analogies. One of the most beautiful concepts used to explain this unity is called perichoresis. It's a Greek term that suggests a kind of divine dance, a mutual indwelling. The idea is that the three persons are in this constant, dynamic, inseparable relationship. Each one is in the other, without ever merging or losing who they are. But perhaps the most famous analogy of all comes from the great theologian Augustine. He looked inward at the human mind, which is supposed to be made in God's image, and he saw a parallel. He said the single mind exists as three inseparable functions. It knows itself, which he called memory, and it loves itself, which he called will. So you have one mind, but three distinct aspects. It's a really fascinating attempt to find a reflection of the Trinity inside of us. Finally, in our last section, let's talk about the legacy. How did this incredibly abstract theological idea actually end up shaping the daily life, the art, and the worship of Christianity for the next 2,000 years? Well, its influence is everywhere once you start looking. That Trinitarian formula isn't just a string of words. It's right at the heart of baptism. It's inspired timeless art, from Andrei Rublev's iconic painting of the three angels to all the threes and triangles you see hidden in church architecture. And at the end of the day, it's still a central, non-negotiable belief for the vast majority of Christians today. And that brings us to our final thought for today. This wasn't a doctrine that just appeared out of thin air. It was forged over centuries of debate, of reflection, and of genuine struggle. So it leaves us with this question: how does that long human struggle to define the infinite ultimately shape the very nature of faith itself?